urban parish in Iowa. And is the mic working? Can you hear it? Okay, it's all right. So how I came to be a minister, I think is important because I never intended, oh, thank you. This is who I am. I never intended to become a pastor. That wasn't something that I planned on. But I was an AmeriCorps Vista volunteer in Gallup, New Mexico in 1999. And I was working for a legal aid program on a domestic violence project. And because the program, a lot of AmeriCorps fellowships are like this, they don't know what to do with you. And the legal aid office just ignored me. And so I went out and started talking to folks one-on-one. I didn't realize this was a community organizing strategy, but started visiting with folks, law enforcement, people who worked for the domestic violence shelter, to learn more about the issue of domestic violence. And I kept hearing these stories about how the church, specifically the Christian church, Protestant and Catholic, had been really harmful to a number of the folks that I encountered. So survivors who had been told, this is your cross to bear, God is punishing you, you need to stay in this marriage, things like that made it harder for folks to get help. And then I also heard a lot of stories about the boarding schools that were run by religious communities where people had been abused. So a lot of very hurtful, awful stories. And so I grew up as a Lutheran and never really thought much about my faith. Honestly, the only education I had really ever gotten as a kid about how to be Christian was that I wasn't supposed to have sex before I got married, which wasn't really helpful in this moment. And so I had questions about how to respond to these issues. And so I ended up coordinating a conference for faith leaders on domestic violence. So in that community, there were a number of traditional Native practitioners and a spectrum of religious practices and Christians. And so the first pastor that I went to ask if he would be part of the planning committee said, "Why would you want to do that? Church isn't where you bring your problems. You dress up nice, you put your best face forward, you don't bring your problems to church." And I knew that didn't sound right to me. And so I said, well, come on and be part of this process. And so he humored me. I was 21, and I was like, oh, come on, let's just do this together. And so he helped, and we did this conference on domestic violence for faith leaders talking about faith issues. And after the conference happened, he said, I understand now why this is important. It was happening in my community, but people did not trust me enough to talk to me. And now I realize how I wasn't able to be a resource for them. So that experience got me thinking about Christian leaders and maybe how I could help them to be better at their work. But eventually, as I was trying to, learn how I could find a life and a job doing that, encountering a lot of religious issues, I decided I would just become one to do a better job. So I became a minister. Currently, though, I am a pastor, but I work for the Des Moines Area Religious Council Food Pantry Network, which is a food pantry that serves in Polk County. We serve people from everywhere. And we assist about 20,000 unique individuals every single month. DMARC started as a group of churches trying to work together on a lot of issues, and food insecurity became the primary thing. And we became interfaith in the 1970s when the first Jewish congregation joined. In the 1990s, the first Muslim congregation joined. So religious communities working together has been a really important part of that history of the organization. And we talk about it all the time. To have religious in our name, we know that's a barrier to people. We know that's confusing to folks because we're not really a religious council anymore. Things have changed. But that's kind of what we've got right now. But we're looking at how can we find the strengths in that history, in that heritage of all those different religious communities working together on an issue that is important to a lot of different people across cultures, across beliefs, across all kinds of things. Food just matters to everyone. And it's a tremendous opportunity to bring people together. And so in that work, I try to build relationships and understanding across religious diversity. And that includes engaging with folks who are not religious, because those values, those beliefs are important too. I remember hearing at an event years ago a speaker from the atheist community say, and maybe this person's in the room, it's not belief and no belief, it's religious belief and beliefs that are not religious. Everyone has strong-held beliefs that matter to them, but not all of them have that connection to religion or faith. And so I coordinate a camp every summer for high school students to learn about the religious diversity of the Des Moines metro area. The students come from very different backgrounds. We visit these different religious communities. We have conversations. We go to worship practices, celebrations, meals, and then they each do a digital storytelling project reflecting about their own faith or values, because you don't have to be religious to attend the camp. It's about learning to appreciate things about your neighbors, getting to know your neighbors, and reflecting about yourself and what matters to you. And so at every camp we have folks from various backgrounds. And that's really important to us, to have a lot of different folks trying to explore and navigate and think about these issues in a way, because we're part of a community. And the Des Moines metro area is actually very diverse. And a lot of folks who live here don't know that. And so it's an opportunity to just be more aware about who lives in your community and what matters to them. I also do a lot of kind of get to know your neighbor events where people can come with us to attend events. They can go visit sites, sit down with folks, panels, presentations, things like that. And so I like to think that in this role, my job is just being in everyone's business. I just show up and try to get to know everyone I can. My favorite thing about this work is I get to eat everyone's food. And again, food brings people together, and it's just such a great way to kind of enter into some of these conversations and these relationships. And so over the years, I've built up some really strong relationships with members of these communities and just become more aware of their needs, their priorities, their presence. And then I am also a state senator for District 14, Waukee, Adel Van Meter, and Dallas County portions of West Des Moines and Clive. So how I became a state senator, again, I never had aspirations to be in state government or run for any office for that matter. But I was a minister in Clive, and my state senator called and asked if I would pray at the opening of the Senate day. There's prayer every day in the Senate. And I said yes to that, not because I'm trying to go out and recruit Lutherans, but because I'm really aware that in that space there are lots of people who are not religious, people who are not Christian, and in our community that's a fact too. And I wanted to be one who got to go and offer a prayer that maybe would be different, something that had space for that, something that acknowledged that. I wanted to do it so that someone else didn't, I wanted to be able to put my stamp on it. And so when I went there, I shared my invocation. And then I just started paying attention to what was happening in that space. I'd never thought about state government before. I couldn't have told you who my legislators were when I lived in Virginia or any of the other states I've lived in. But now the Capitol was just down the road, and there were a lot of issues that I cared about. And all of a sudden I started becoming aware of what was happening in that chamber, in that building, after being in it. So I got involved with some advocacy groups around issues that I cared deeply about, and started going up to the Capitol, and was frustrated by my engagement with my elected leaders, because I felt like they were polite and they listened, but then their votes and their actions just seemed to be going in a different direction than what made sense to me, than what seemed to be true to what the community needed. And so after a few years of engaging with some of these issues and seeing the impact that policy has on the things that I care about when I was a church leader working in the nonprofit world, I found out that my state senator, same guy who invited me to come pray, was going to be running for re-election. And I was like, somebody has to run against him. And then I realized it could be me. And that was this process of exploring that and trying to figure out if it was something I really wanted to do. Because I wasn't serving in a church, it was much more possible, because Lutherans have a lot of discomfort with political engagement. And it comes from our history of the Roman Empire being so enmeshed with the church and the power, and that power being used to limit religious expression and religious disagreements. And so, that's part of that tradition that I'm coming out of. So we tend to be kind of private, personal in our practice, but also be real hesitant to talk about the things that matter to us. So actually, I was just at an ELCA women's gathering to talk to them about how to be engaged in politics. So people say you shouldn't talk about religion and you shouldn't talk about politics. And if that's the case, I would not be able to say much of anything. And I really do believe that religion and politics are both at their heart about how we live together. So, as I said before, everyone has beliefs, and some are connected to religious practice and some are not. But as a person, it's really hard to just be like, well, I'm just going to set aside this piece of myself. I can just wall that off, I can remove that, and function out here completely separate. I think that's kind of disingenuous to think that we could do that, but I don't know if it's a good thing. So I think we need to be honest about what our commitments are, be aware of what motivates us. And for me, a lot of the things that I believe deeply, I think they're just the right things to do. They honestly don't really come from my religious teachings, but it's the religious teachings and the community that hold me accountable to keep committed to those things when it's hard. Sometimes they give me the motivation to be working on those things. Sometimes they help redirect me to go back to those things when I wander off from them. Sometimes it just frustrates me, but that's another story. But to be honest about the things that are important to us, because there's a lot of people with deeply held, important beliefs coming from a lot of different places. So to be able to reflect and talk about what matters to you is really, really important. But boundaries are really, really important. So while I can't separate out the fact that I am a minister, that I have religious commitments, I am very, very mindful that there are ways that I should not be speaking in that chamber, or there are actions that I should not be taking. And I'm always negotiating that and trying to figure that out, because I believe very strongly that the power of the state, the resources of the state, should never be used to compel religious practice. They should never be used to elevate one religious practice over others. I think that is wrong. So, I feel like there are ways to be a person of faith engaging in politics that can be true to who you are and true to what matters to you, but that does not cross that line. And so I'm going to tell you a little bit about how I try to live that out. And this is helpful for me, but it could be helpful for people from a lot of different belief backgrounds. It's just something interesting to think about. And maybe it'll help you understand who I am and how I function And I'm always working on this. I'm always thinking about this. Because that's the important thing to me, is to be self-reflective, maybe self-critical about it, and aware. So the Des Moines metro area is incredibly religiously diverse. There's a lot of people who are not religious. And we have about a dozen mosques, different ethnic backgrounds. We have about a dozen Buddhist temples. We have 2 Sikh temples, one in Johnston, one in West Des Moines. We have a Hindu temple outside of Madrid, but we also have a Bhutanese Hindu temple with very different kind of worship and community on the south side. We've got about 5 Orthodox Christian churches. And it's always really important for me to remind Christians that Christianity is a global religion, and there are people who even don't celebrate Christmas or Easter on the same days that the Western Church does. And a lot of people aren't aware of that. So very different practices and even dates of holidays. And then about 4 distinct worshiping Jewish communities that have significant differences with one another. So we have a really diverse community. And I think it's an amazing community to live in. But a lot of people, depending on where you live and who you hang out with, you might not know this. So it's true that we all have things in common, and in my work, it's not about trying to erase the differences or overcome the differences. We have things in common, that's true. But the truth is that we are not all the same. And some of those differences are painful, they're insurmountable, they're just things that we might not be able to overcome. And that is what pluralism is. It's about acknowledging that, yes, we've got things that we can share, that we can connect on, that we can communicate with, we can join together on, and then there are going to be times that we're just not going to be able to do that, or ways that we can't come together. And, both of those things can be true at the same time. And that's hard to hold on to both of those and live with that. But that is what pluralism is, and that's really the goal. And sometimes in any community, if you feel like I've got a strong belief, I believe what I believe is true, then other people must be wrong. Then I must reject and put down and disagree with that other position. Iowa State fans have to hate Iowa. It's just, sometimes that's the attitude. It's like, my team's better than yours, and we're going to dog on yours. But I really don't believe that that is the way it has to be when you have strongly held beliefs, things that you know are true and you hold fast to. I think it is, and sometimes the perspective is, well, if you have weak faith, weak beliefs in things, what anyone else does is fine. It doesn't matter because nothing really matters. I don't think it has to be either or. I think it is possible to have strongly held beliefs, truths that you hold to, that matter to you, but then also have a positive view of others, to appreciate things about them, to be inspired by things about other folks who have different perspectives. And that's hard when there are some, really tough issues that are really important to us. But for me, in doing the work of interfaith, I am inspired by my neighbors all the time. And so one example that I give is the Sikh community. They wear the turban. So if you see a person in the United States wearing a turban, 95% of them are going to be Sikh. And from the history of the Sikh community, the idea of the turban came about because there were some people being persecuted, and the Sikhs weren't standing up for them, weren't helping. They were just hiding in the crowd, walking away. And they wanted to have some way to hold themselves accountable to stand up for others, to stick out like a sore thumb. And a turban really does that. You see someone and they are a Sikh, you know it. And it's a sign to the community and a reminder to themselves that they are there to help and to stand up for others. And I'm really inspired by that. Now, as a Christian, I'm not going to start wearing a turban. But I can think about in my own values, my own life, how could I do something to show that I'm that kind of person who wants to help others? How can I stand out in a crowd? And I can think about how that could be authentically true for me. That's an example of how I can appreciate the Sikh community without trying to become a Sikh or feeling like I need to abandon what's important to me or my tradition and history. That there are opportunities within my own belief system and my own practices to think about how I could live that out. So I'm inspired by my neighbors, and I feel like it makes my beliefs stronger. And it gives me good questions. I often talk about in the atheist community, to ask hard questions is really important. You shouldn't shy away from that. And that's something that some of my conversation partners, they do for me to help me think critically and not be afraid of the hard things. And so in my life as a state legislator, there are times when I'm very clear that I'm doing the church thing and I'm the minister and that's what I'm about. And there are times that I know I'm the senator and that's what I'm there for. But there's a lot of times that get kind of mushy and kind of confusing, like today. I'm not really sure who I am right now. I'm kind of all things. Sometimes I can tell by the outfit I'm wearing or my name tag, or who's paying me. But other times it's hard because all of these things, they connect and they get a little messy. But so for me, being a person of faith in the public realm as an elected leader, I have an opportunity to subvert the dominant narrative about what a Christian is. I don't love other people and welcome other people regardless of who they are. I welcome them with regard to who they are, their uniqueness. I don't think that's an obstacle to my faith. And so here I am in a congregation preaching a UCC church that was giving their monthly offering to One Iowa. GLBTQ issues. Not all Christians feel the same way about those things, and I want to be able to remind folks that, there is some pretty strong evidence that that's not really a religious commitment. That, there are religious people who are saying, no, that's not something I'm seeing in my scriptures or my tradition or my faith that I think is, an important thing to lift up. So I can challenge folks' ideas about what it means to be a person of faith in the public realm or a Christian by trying to live that out in a different way. Because we tend to see one kind of way of being religious and political, and I think it's problematic. And at the event I was just at, there was someone who was sharing about their concerns about being political as a person of faith, and it's like, I don't want to be that person. I don't want to be that negative stereotype about a person of faith being political. And so I can open up some other ways and challenge what I see. I do a lot of encouraging my colleagues or other elected leaders to get out and meet the folks from the different religious communities. So there's Cindy Axney wearing a headscarf and holding a bunch of Bosnian food. We had just been to the Bosnian mosque for iftar. And she has her own connections with these different communities, but I like to invite my colleagues along just to help them know their neighbors and know, those folks in those communities, they deserve the opportunity to meet their elected leaders. Like I said, we all have communities that we naturally gravitate toward and spend time with. We have to work hard to get out of our bubbles. And so I try to provide opportunities for our elected leaders to meet these folks because they're important. They matter to me. They should have their voice represented in government. And it's really important that people who aren't at the table get to meet their electeds. And they get to have a connection with them. And maybe they can, through that, think about running for office themselves and being part of that. So we have prayer in the Senate and the House. I mean, it's a practice that happens. And I have feelings about that, you know. I'm real concerned about somehow trying to endorse what we're going to do there that day with holy words. Because some of the things that happen there aren't very holy, in my opinion. You know, and so I'm concerned about that. And in the state Senate, it's not a very diverse chamber. And there are a lot of folks who come from a specific kind of Christian background. And so those are the prayers we hear every day. Because a lot of my colleagues, you know, they don't want to do it. So they don't. It's really whoever offers themselves up to do it gets to do it. And I'm like, well, if we're going to have that time, I want to make sure that Iowa's voice is being heard in that time. Now, I'm a Lutheran, but I have the opportunity to invite other folks to write the prayer, write the invocation, and I share it. And I couldn't find the picture of me and Jason when he came to do it. But, you know, it's important that we acknowledge that this is a reality in our community, that there's lots of voices with different beliefs that matter. And I prefer to seek out folks that are not coming from my tradition. And if my colleagues are uncomfortable when somebody is sharing a prayer from another religion, I want them to think about that, how their prayer might feel for someone else. You know, I want to really push them on, you know, if we're going to talk about religious freedom, then let's make sure it's for everybody. So doing this practice has got me in trouble with folks. Some people are very angry with me for praying. We all have our own ways of kind of approaching these issues. You know, so I've heard from progressive folks, you shouldn't do it, you should just not pray, you should protest it, you should use all your political capital to attack this one thing. You know, we all have to make choices, but this is the way that I approach it. When I shared, the first time I prayed in the Iowa Senate, I shared a poem that was written by a Muslim constituent that had attributes of God in Arabic, and I ended up on Jihad Watch website. So, and there were some people who were really upset with me. I mean, they didn't tell me to my face, but I heard about it later. I got hate mail. I had some people show up at the Capitol and be like, how could you do that? You know, and it just showed me it's even more important to say, if we're going to do this, it needs to be for all people. And then I think it's just really, really important that people in Iowa have access to the political process, and that they get to be in this building. And so I like to reach out to some of the different religious communities that I've met, or different ethnic minorities that I've met. So this is some folks from the Karen community in Iowa. They're mostly Christian, but there is a Muslim Karen group, ethnic minorities from Burma. And I said, you know, it'd be great to have some of your leaders come to the Capitol. I can introduce them, everyone will clap, and then we can take some pictures and I can kind of show you around, and that will be, you know, just an opportunity for you. And they said, how many people can we bring? I said, well, it's fine, just bring as many as you want. So they did. And that got a little unmanageable, but you can see that there's an excitement for folks. People really do want to be involved. They do want those opportunities. And so I keep thinking about, again, who's not at the table, who should be brought in to the conversation, to the discussion. Just even being in the building and meeting your elected leader, that can transform the political process. And I'm a strong believer in the power of people showing up, working together. And so, you know, this is a faith commitment to me. But, you know, I think it's just important for leaders in our state to do. I am very reluctant to speak from a faith perspective in the Senate chamber. You know, I don't use scripture to justify my positions. it's not something that I do. And so I'm always struggling as a person of faith, like how to be authentic to who I am and to be good in the role that I am to serve all people. So the way that I do it, it might not work for everyone, and I am open to hearing about that. And I think about that and I reflect on that. I do take people's criticism and concerns very seriously. But for me, this is the best way I know how to do it. And I hope that it can kind of expand the conversation a little bit. I got a call yesterday from a lobbyist she was upset saying, so I was talking to somebody and they were joking, but they said, oh yeah, that's right, you're not a Christian because you're a Democrat. I'm like, that's really unfair. It's not true. But just the way that things have become so like it's this or it's that, it's divided, it's, one political party doesn't own being religious or faithful, and just as one political party doesn't own having the right answers or the best ideas. And it's troubling to me to see those stereotypes being so deeply ingrained when that isn't really how things are. So, I really appreciate this community, to be advocating for folks who are not religious, to be present, to be part of the process, to remind our elected leaders that there's a lot of folks who are not religious and live that out in different ways, and they need to represent them too. And so I'm wondering if there are any questions or comments for me. Oh, and before I start that, I want to pass out, I work for the Des Moines Area Religious Council Food Pantry Network, and I know a number of you are here in the metro area. We have an on-site pantry that every day we've been breaking 1,000 visitors in our network. And our on-site pantry is just getting slammed, and we need volunteers to help. To make the system work, we're seeing more and more pressures on families, and it's just a great opportunity to just get a glimpse into what's going on in folks' lives that might be different than yours, but it does make a difference for our staff. And so I'm going to pass this out because this has got information about who we are, how to get involved. If folks need help, you can take one and pass it on. Yeah. All right, Warren, are you going to moderate?
I have to say, I didn't want to sound snarky here, but you beat Mr. Jake Chapman. All right. Sarah, thank you very much. As usual, that was wonderful.
Thank
very hesitant because of the language barrier, even though a lot of them have, kids in school, a lot of their parents have taken ESL language classes. But I encourage you, if you see somebody maybe from a different culture, somebody that looks different, somebody that you think maybe just needs a friend, just say hi and you can start a conversation. But I really like seeing that picture. If I could see better, I could probably see a bunch of my Marshall County friends. There are? Okay, I'll look up close during the event and see if I can see something. Please, just take the time, just say hi, just a smile. I can just open up doors and make people feel more welcome here in Iowa.
Hiya, and thanks a lot for being here. Taking time out of your day is always a wonderful thing. Thank you very much for your opening up to the many different communities. Being from New York City, we learned to open up to different communities, right? Anyways, I've been a secular person my whole life. I was not raised religious. My mother eventually became a dynamic Wiccan. My father was angry with the Catholic Church. No one spoke against God and no one spoke for God. I was always given scientific explanation as to how babies are born or how time works and that we all die and turn to dust and that's it. There's no promise of heaven. That's wonderful in itself, but as a young person, anything that had interfaith or faith in it was not known to me. And to this day still, I wonder how many secular kids would feel comfortable going to something that says interfaith. And is there possibly a way or a word that we could add that would include those children as well? Because I know that there are a lot of groups that could help me out as a child who came from extreme poverty. But because I had faith, and believe me, I did try to do a few of those, and I got lectured. I got sung to, and I got amen. So again, is there a word or way that could be more inclusive to secular, non-religious children in the programs in which you're presently running? Question.
So, Interfaith Youth Leadership Camp is a hard sell for any teenager. So a lot of the people who end up attending a camp, we do quite a bit of explanation of what it is and what it means, and all of the video projects from the last 7 years are on the website, and we make it very clear, you don't have to be religious to attend. This is what it's about. I don't know if there's a word that could do it for us, and I know that word is not adequate, but we've had a lot of agnostic, atheist, pagan folks be part of the camp over the years. And I think a lot of it has to do with the relationship. So I have a connection with different communities, and then we can talk about that. And then we have other students who've gone through the camp who can speak to that, which helps. But like I said, with our name, Des Moines Area Religious Council, we know that religious word can be off-putting. We're not really sure. We're working on what we can do about it. It's an important part of our history, and yet we know it's limiting. And we're always trying to help expand that idea of what religious means for people, because there's a lot of folks out there who, when they see religious, they think Christian, and a specific kind of white, Western Christian, evangelical, which, there's a lot more to that word than that. So we do work very hard with that, but yeah, the language is inadequate. I'm going to let Warren decide who gets to talk. This lady's had her hand up quite a bit, though. Yeah.
Thank you. I think we come to very similar conclusions, but I like the scientific attitude. And the scientific attitude requires precise definitions. So we aren't talking beyond against that faith is believing what you know ain't true. That's not a scientific attitude. And the scientific attitude is accepting conclusions rather than believing, accepting always with the attitude that we'll try to listen for where we're wrong, because it's easier to see where we're right and just not even, our senses are just trained not to see what we don't already agree with. And always ready to change your mind. And I think this is a big difference. But I do have a question related. Have you met Christians who believe that prayer is supposed to be like Jesus said in Matthew, where you're supposed to go off by yourself and not ask for anything?
The fun thing about that scripture, when you pray, do not be like the hypocrites who stand on the street corners, is that gets read on Ash Wednesday every year when you're getting those ashes on your forehead. So it's intentionally, I think, uncomfortable for us to have to deal with. And so every Christian, every pastor kind of struggles with that on that day, because then we're like, well, should we wash them off when we leave? What should we do? I think a lot of people kind of struggle with that, how to do that. And when I get up to speak or preach, I think it's good to have that kind of like concern about how to do this well and how to carry that out. I think when folks are too confident, then they tend to, of thinking they're right, make some pretty horrible mistakes. But yeah, there are people of faith who really struggle authentically with that. And I have lots of thoughts about prayers. I hear prayers all the time that I'm sitting there going, oh, I hate this prayer, it's terrible. There are different ways of praying in a lot of different cultures, and it looks very different than just one kind of prayer.
So we've got Tom, Jason, Alan, Ed, Eric.
Hi, I'm Tom.
Hey, Tom.
As a former evangelical, born-again Lutheran Sunday school teacher and Bible study enthusiast student, I would add the word humanistic into your interfaith humanistic alliance, because that would allow everyone to claim relationship with people. We're all humans first.
Yeah, and it's helpful to hear these perspectives. A lot of the stuff that we have our name for DMARC or the camp even. My first day at DMARC is the first day of the first camp. So I kind of came in with it the way it was. and then we evolve, language evolves, it changes. We realize that the way we name things, the way we classify things aren't adequate, and it continues to change. And so it's really helpful to hear these things. And I do take them in mind, and we'll bring them back to my group.
Awesome. This is great, Sarah. Alan Deal, I'm the Vice President of Humanists of Lynn County and also the President of the Interreligious Council of Lynn County. So I'm what I call the non-religious member of our interreligious group there. So I'm really close friends with a lot of the religious leaders in the community, which has given me a unique voice and a unique perspective. I guess my question for you is, as you're sitting in the Capitol and you're thinking about your vote and you're thinking in terms of what really is motivating me to vote one way or the other, do you have rules, controls in place that really help you to keep in check your religious beliefs as far as having kind of undue influence or outweighed influence on your vote one way or the other? Do you find yourself having that conversation in your head, considering that? If not, why? If so, why? And maybe other conversations you've had with people that maybe have similar concerns.
think is right to do, and I think a lot of non-religious people would agree with me on that. It's surprising to me how many religious people disagree with me on that, which I find really troubling. So I often find myself, like I said, a lot of my commitments are because I think it's just the right thing to do, or I've learned from my experiences in life. But the religious community gives me resources to hold true to those things, to do them when they're hard, to try to be loving and kind in my words, forgiving to my neighbors when I disagree with them. The religious piece of me is operating more as a kind of a resource to hold fast to those things. So, yeah. And there's nothing really, aside from forgiving people, there's nothing really that's just like a purely religious belief to me, because that's the hardest one for me. I think it's right, it's really important to forgive people, and that's hard. It's really, really hard, because, sometimes in this world it doesn't really make sense to forgive people who've done terrible things to you or hurt you. But for the most part, I'm thinking about those things, but yeah.
So I'm one of those people who has very strong feelings on religion. Anybody who follows me on social media knows this. I just think, I guess one comment on that question is I think it's very telling that all of the folks that stand in opposition to what all of our speakers, including Senator Trone Garriott, says, all the folks who stand in opposition generally stand in opposition on religious grounds. And I think that's worth considering, and I think it's an important aspect of your struggles. And I find it very frustrating and difficult as well. But as a religious, non-religious group, I can ask you the same question I asked the previous speaker. As non-religious people become more and more recognized as the nuns, up to 30% of the population in Trone, what can we do, in your view, to better engage with not only Democrats but also Republicans in order to get things done that stand in protection of the separation of church and state? Since hourly the opposition to that are religious Republicans.
So Jason and I first met on social media. He was kind of trolling me. And I said, let's go have coffee. And I think we realized we were actually much more close together than perhaps we realized before. So I really appreciate my relationship with you over the years, because it's been awesome with you. The continual challenge is that so many of our neighbors are just not engaged. They're nuns in a lot of ways. Life is stressful. Our culture tends to encourage people to focus on individual needs and not on the community. There's a lot of pressures that keep people from being engaged civically, electorally. And, it's just so important that we have a legislature or a governing body that looks like Iowa, that is representative, because that is their job, is to represent the whole state. And when I look at the Senate chamber, it doesn't look like Iowa necessarily, and it doesn't reflect a lot of values and beliefs and economic factors and all kinds of things. And so, it's about helping people understand that they have power. And when somebody is not religious, and there's all these other ways that our civic fabric has unraveled, people don't have access to the same kind of community groups that bring them together. A lot of those things have fallen by the wayside. They need someplace to go. And people are hungry for meaning, they're hungry for community, they're hungry for relationship. And, a lot of folks are like, well, I'm not religious, so I'm not going to go to church, I guess there's nothing for me. But you can create a space, you can create a community that people can be part of, united in different ways, around different values. And then also show them what's possible when you're part of a community working together about things you care about. There's a lot of power in working together. And I always encourage folks, government, and they're doing things, and these are the people, that's a great first step. There's just so much opportunity. And you have a tremendous opportunity to do that with people, bring people together for good things.
So we'll take Ed and Eric, and then we'll have to wrap up with Sarah.
I'll just ask her later. Can I just ask her?
You can ask me later.
Oh, okay, that works.
So the question I have, and I try to make it concise here, for time constraints, obviously. Do you have any advice on arguments that you have used or could think of potentially using to encourage a sense amongst more religiously devout Republicans especially to find value in separation of church and state? Or is it kind of a lost cause for some of these folks?
You know, if I'm having a hard time convincing people of things that I care about, I'm always struggling to try to figure out how do I convince my colleagues on the other side of the aisle to care about the things that I care about.
couple months ago.
Oh, okay. Right here?
Thank you.
Yeah.